Hello, Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Hope you're all safe, sound, and healthy. And this is a podcast that I was planning to do for about 2 to 3 days now. And I had put together everything. And then I thought, oh, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. And then the whole, PIMS fire incident was also going on. So I was a bit divided, that everybody, like we're supposed to be looking at what's going on with the whole PIMS, crisis, catastrophe, tragedy, arson, crime, criminal negligence, actual murder, whatever you like to call it. And then on the other side, I would start a podcast and talk about, oh, do you know about the Republican era studio sets that were created out of bricks and mortar in China? But yeah, actually, that is something that I think is worthy. It's worth talking about. Okay, it's worthy of our exploration and about reflection, especially because it talks about that kind of business strategy that the West, especially the Western capitalism, seems to think is idealistic, and it's impossible and unreal, and whereas this is something that, as we know, maybe in a different way, but to a large extent, it is something that has been also taught in Islam and endorsed by Islamic business ethics, where when you do business, then it should benefit everybody and not just the one person, right? Whereas Western capitalism is all about benefiting one person, and to hell with everybody else. So actually, this whole research was triggered by the fact that if you look at Chinese Republican era dramas, which is the setting that they usually use, it's a very popular setting, that they usually use for detective-oriented dramas or mystery suspense-oriented dramas, and there's one thing that confused me a lot, because whenever I look at them, both as a writer and as a producer, I kept on seeing that, no, these are real roads, these are real bricks and mortar buildings, these are real, so are they actually filming it in the original, for example, the French Concession, because the French Concession was the place that they usually tended to portray in the Republican era dramas. So I was thinking that, okay, maybe they tend to portray the French Concession because that is that one part of the city that has been kept intact till date, right? And then I found out that yes, actually it is kept intact, but it's a bustling, active city. It's still very, very active. People are still living there. It is not a dead city. It's not, it's exactly in its original form, obviously, because people are still living there. And it's a very, very, bustling city. So filming actually is not possible. But they do tend to try to shoot a little bit of portions over there, but because of the heavy traffic and the influx of crowds, people, activities, they find it very, very difficult to shoot an entire scene, for example. So then I started wondering, okay, so because as we know, Coke Studio Pakistan especially has shown the world that it is possible to set up a whole studio in the form of to create like a whole neighborhood or a small portion of a block or a city, or, like with building structures and all, but it's essentially a studio. And then, I was wondering if that is what basically they had done. But then I was thinking, because they filmed so many dramas, in those exact quarters or those exact locations. So are they using live location together with studio, or what? And so when I went on to do the research, I found out that yes, they are in fact doing live location, but they are majorly filming on set. But the thing is that the set doesn't look like a set, right? So then I found out that yes, these are quite literally entire fake cities built at a one-on-one scale. So these aren't just flimsy Hollywood backdrops or painted boards. They are fully constructed, highly detailed, real brick and mortar urban environments that you can physically walk through. You enter the buildings and you can drive vehicles down the street. So these are entire cities that were built from scratch. and they're actual brick and mortar. And the scale of these setups is truly massive. And so basically, it is called the Shanghai Film Park. Yeah, this whole, this whole area, this whole studio, or this whole fake cities which was built, was originally a village, right? And then when they converted it into these fake cities for shooting purposes, yes, because they built these entire living, breathing cities, for entirely for filming purposes. So, and then it was called the Shanghai Film Park, and it is the 1930s metropolis basically. It covers roughly 410,000 square meters, and it is built like as I said, a living, breathing replica of old colonial Shanghai. Now, if we look at the working infrastructure, it features a full-scale replica of Nanjing Road, which was Shanghai's famous main commercial street. Operational vintage tram tracks, which is something that absolutely made me want to find out if they were shooting on location or not, with moving trolley cars, street lights, stone bridges, and a mock harbor with a stationary ship. So it replicates entire blocks. Yeah, entire blocks of the of Shikumen, which is the traditional lane houses, massive European style banking houses, vintage theaters, and rows of colonial estates. And the hyper realistic details that you see there, because especially for specific war films, they built a massive 12-meter high, 112-meter long damaged city wall. Yes. They actually went to historical locations. They took molds of real war-torn brick ruins, and they rebuilt them brick by brick with simulated bullet holes and burn marks. And that is why you get that, that feel, that hyper-realistic feel of it when you see it, captured in these dramas. And then there's another one that is called the Hangdian World Studios. This is a country of film sets, because if you look at Shanghai Film Park as a city, then Hangdian World Studios is a massive metropolis. It is the largest outdoor film studio in the world, spanning over 33 square kilometers, which is about 8,100 acres. Instead of just one city, it is a collection of several entirely different historical cities built right next to each other. And that's how they managed to capture, the whole authenticity. So, for example, you have the Guangzhou and Hong Kong Street, which is a 400,000 square meter neighborhood that perfectly captures the 19th century colonial era, complete with European warehouses, rivers, and late Qing dynasty storefronts. And then you have Dreambund. This is a newly expanded section that acts as an amusement park and movie lot, featuring a flawless, massive one by one or one-to-one replica of Shanghai's iconic waterfront, the Bund, during the early 1900s. Then you have the ancient cities. Just down the road from the colonial areas, they have again the one-to-one scale replica of the Forbidden City, which was the imperial palace in Beijing, an entire ancient Qing dynasty palace city, and sprawling medieval water towns. Again, that's how you get the authenticity when they do the period dramas. Now, how they function day to day, because my thing was, have they been turned into a live museum, sort of, so to speak, where tourists can walk in to get the whole vibe, or were they always meant to be a museum? And so, according to the research that I did, they were never meant to be a museum. They were actually, as I said, made specifically for the purpose of shooting films and dramas. But then when they realized that what they had created were entire cities, or even a whole country in a way, era to era. So they realized that they actually have a valuable asset that could be used to regenerate more money, more revenue, and so they turned it into a tourist attraction or sort of like a live museum. Now, because these are actual permanent buildings, as I said, so they decided that now they double as massive tourist theme parks when film crews aren't actively using them. So tourists can dress up in vintage Republican era or traditional clothing, rent period accurate bicycles, and walk through the city. Now, Hangdian built for a single movie blockbuster. Yeah. The thing about Hangdian, which is referred to as the largest, studio in the world, or outdoor studio, which is basically called a country, a small country within a country. This was built, as I said, specifically for a single movie blockbuster. What happened was in 1996, China was preparing for a massive historical event, the 1997 handover of Hong Kong from British to Chinese rule. If anybody remembers that, I remember that. So to commemorate this, a legendary Chinese director named Xi Jin wanted to shoot an epic blockbuster movie called The Opium War. Who remembers that? Actually, I remember that too. So the problem that the director faced was he needed an authentic 19th century colonial city, but real modern cities like Hong Kong or Guangzhou were already full of skyscrapers, neon signs, and traffic, obviously. Now, the solution was brought about by a local multimillionaire named Zhu Wenrong. Now, Zhu Wenrong in Zhejiang province stepped in. He hired a massive army of laborers and completely transformed acres of poor farming villages into Guangzhou Street, a flawless, full-scale 19th century colonial neighborhood, in just a few months. Yeah, he was already a pretty rich man. And actually, I'll come and tell you a little more details about the fact that this village was actually his own village originally as well, and how they worked together, So, because it created a snowball effect, the set was an instant success. So soon after, another famous director, Zhang Yimou, needed a massive ancient palace for his martial arts epic hero. The name of the film was Hero, if anybody remembers, because it was starring Jet Li. And Hangdian again quickly built the colossal Qin Palace set. The studio simply never stopped expanding. So the Shanghai Film Park was built for art house cinema. It was established in 1992. And it was established specifically to solve a logistical nightmare for directors. Famous director Chen Kaige wanted to shoot a period drama called Temptress Moon, starting Gong Li and Leslie Chung. Now, filming in the real modern Shanghai was becoming impossible, obviously, due to the rapid 90s economic boom and construction. The Shanghai Film Group invested in the lot, the land, to build a permanent, perfectly preserved 1930s replica of Nanjing Road and the French concession, specifically so directors wouldn't have to keep fighting city traffic. And then, as I said, they shifted to live museums when they realized that these places were built out of real brick and stone and wood rather than cheap plywood. And they had a massive asset on their hands. So once filming wrapped on major movies, the studios opened their gates to public to recoup construction costs. So today, it operates as a dual-purpose business model. So by day, it is a booming live museum and theme park where tourists pay to dress up in the 1930s, the cheapows or the colonial suits. They ride vintage trams, they watch stunt shows and all. And by night, and in cordoned-off zones, it remains a fully operational, high-tech Hollywood-scale filming lot where millions of dollars are spent on TV production every day. So now, the thing about the Hangdian group is what I was very interested in, because as I said, okay, you had the Shanghai Film Park, but then you had the Hangdian group that came and built the whole country scale, largest outdoor film set. And as I said, that was actually his own village, so to speak, that he had converted into now this huge set with bricks and mortar. So the story of how the farmers were compensated is one of the most fascinating economic case studies in modern China. While the initial cash payouts for the farmland itself were relatively modest by modern standards, the true wealth came from a unique business model. The local farmers were directly integrated into the studio's corporate structure, transforming a poverty-stricken village into one of the wealthiest towns in the region. So as we know, the founder of Hangdian Group was Zhu Wenrong, right? So Zhu Wenrong was a former farmer himself. So what he did is he implemented the philosophy of common prosperity, Gongfu. Instead of just seizing land and, displacing people, the studio built an entire ecosystem that enriched the local community through several unique mechanisms. So what happened is that the farmers, from tilling soil, they went on to become movie stars and business owners. So rather than losing their livelihoods, the local farmers suddenly found themselves at the center of a multi-billion-dollar economy. And for example, thousands of local farmers traded their plowshares for period costumes and became the hung drift extras, so they formed the backbone of the studio's massive army of background extras, earning significantly higher daily wages than agriculture ever provided. And then the hospitality boom began because the farmers converted their old village houses into boutique hotels, restaurants, and prop rental shops to serve the thousands of actors and film crews and tourists arriving daily. And then there was the studio employment. So the Hangdian World Studios conglomerate hired thousands of locals permanently to handle construction, security, maintenance, and tourism management. So it ended up being a lifelong corporate welfare with perks, because the Hangdian Group operates as a township and village enterprise, which you can abbreviate into TVE. A massive portion of the film studio's profits is reinvested directly into the local populace. Registered local residents receive an extraordinary list of corporate-funded benefits. For example, free education. The group provides completely free schooling for local children from kindergarten all the way through university. And then the locals receive heavily subsidized medical care at the group's massive regional hospitals. And then they get old age security. So the town provides comprehensive basic old age security and pension lifelines for elderly farmers. And then to top it all, as if that wasn't enough, they also get free transit and leisure. So local seniors get free access to all the mega studio tourist attractions and community buses. Now, there's this one catch, and that is the land ownership laws. Because it is worth noting that under Chinese law, individuals do not privately own land. It is collectively owned by the village or the state. Therefore, the farmers do not get to sell their land to the highest bidder on an open commercial market. If they had just taken a one-time cash payout and left, they would have missed out, in fact. So I guess in a way this catch was not really a catch, but a good thing. It paid out because their massive leap in quality of life happened because they stayed and pivoted into the tourism and entertainment industries. So what exactly, how exactly did they, continue to, because for example, one of the biggest questions I think one would ask is, okay, so, the people there, they have all these facilities. They converted their homes into boutiques and rental prop rentals and everything, and they're earning through it and all. And so they're basically in a way business partners, right, of the Hangdian Group, and so they share in the profits and everything. But what about all the, I mean, the rent, how does it work, right? So does it happen that the people that come, then they have to obviously pay for using the studios, and then they have to pay separately for using the shops and the props within? How does it work? But actually, the film studios do not charge any rent at all for the filming sets. So here's the fun fact, or a twist, you can say. So while the studios themselves remain free, yeah, because he actually announced, after some time, when he had finished building and facilitating and all, then he had announced that the studios could be used rent free, and that drove a lot of the directors and producers right to his studios, right? But here is actually, in a way, the catch, because although there is no rent at all for the filming sets, instead the local farmers, they rent their converted village houses directly to the actors or the film crews and tourists as long-term apartments, hotels, and business storefronts. So the business model functions through a unique division of labor. You have the studios, genius rule of free sets, right? Which, as I said, Hangdian Group made that groundbreaking decision in the year 2000, where they declared all movie sets completely free, completely rent-free, for any production company. And as I said, that sort of, brought in a lot of, production. So whether a crew wants to shoot a massive battle at the fake Forbidden City, a spy thriller in the colonial sector, or or whatever it is that they want from within any part of that studio, they do not pay a single cent to use the actual structures. So what instead was that the farmers made their money through that, because hundreds of film crews arrive simultaneously, because it's free, right, to use the studios themselves. So the town experiences a massive population influx. A single major production can bring over 1,000 workers. You have the directors, you have the camera operators, you have the costume designers, you have the hair technicians, you have the whole crew, right, who need a place to live for 3 to 6 months. So this is where the farmers' houses come into play, because you have the crew boarding and the cast apartments, And by the way, they renovated their old multi-story village homes into apartment complexes and boutique hotels in order to, facilitate this, okay, for rent purposes. And they lease these directly to film crews for months at a time, right? And remember the commercial storefronts that I talked about. So the ground floors of these village homes were converted into these trendy restaurants and massage parlors and late night street food stalls and laundry businesses. So film stars and crew members spend millions of dollars dining and relaxing in these local establishments after 14-hour shoot days. And for them also it works, because then they don't have to go out of the studios in order to look for these things, right? So it's all within one place. And then if you remember, I also mentioned that they have the prop, the prop and costume warehouses. So many farmers also converted their large barns or ground floors into private storage facilities, renting out thousands of period-accurate vintage tables, colonial chairs, and retro luggage pieces to crews. So it's a monopolized ecosystem. While the sets themselves are free, the Hangdian Group, which the farmers are a part of, remember I told you they're basically, in essence, business partners, completely controls the surrounding supply chain. So if a film crew wants to shoot there, they must rent Hangdian's heavy lighting equipment, for example, or hire Hangdian's registered local stuntmen and extras, and utilize the Hangdian owned transit, and high-end hotels for the leading actors. So the system creates a highly successful cooperative loop. Free sets bring the movies, and the movies bring a massive population that pays rent and buys food from the local villages. Okay. So it is, as I said, basically a very hybrid business, structure, you can say, or model that is unique to China. Because as I said, the farmers are essentially shareholders or partners, right, in this whole project. So they didn't just buy stocks on a public market, right? Instead, they became communal partners and institutional stakeholders through what economists call the Hangdian model of collective ownership. As I said, this was a hybrid that he created that became unique to China. So basically, the founder, Zhu Wenrong, structured the entire town's economy around a philosophy known as the Four Commons, right? You have co-creation, common ownership, common prosperity, and shared benefits. This framework reshaped the typical relationship between an employer, a landlord, and local workers. So let's try to understand it a little more, right? How from township enterprise to collective shareholding, how it came to that. Like in 1993, the Hangdian Group became China's very first township and village limited company with official state council approval. Under this structure, the group wasn't strictly Zhu Wenrong's personal piggy bank, nor was it owned by a handful of distant Wall Street style investors. Instead, the asset equity was conceptually split. So the collective community, which is the town and its original farming families, held a massive stakeholder share. As the studio grew into a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, the net worth of the town's collective assets skyrocketed alongside it. So, as I said, they are employees that are also joint shareholders. And how was this implemented? Is basically in order to lock in long-term loyalty and prevent outside corporate raiding, Zhu Wenrong implemented a joint shareholding system for the employees. So local farmers who transitioned into permanent corporate roles, such as set builders, hospitality managers, security chiefs, and prop manufacturers, were issued internal employee shares. This turned everyday workers into actual corporate partners who received annual dividends tied directly to the studio's overall profits, right? So the concept that basically Zhu Wenrong put forward was the enterprise runs society concept, because he famously stepped down as president in 2003, handing day-to-day reins to his son, Zhu Yong'an. He transitioned into a government-approved civic role. So that was the chairman of Hangdian Committee for Joint Creation, Joint Ownership, Common Prosperity, and Shared Benefits. That was his approved civic role, right? Through this committee, the studio behaves like a massive community partner rather than a detached landlord. So, for example, if the studio makes a massive profit, that money bypasses traditional corporate hoarding and goes straight into funding the town's infrastructure. The studio funds the town's local high-speed rail connections, civic centers, and parks out of pocket. So ultimately, while Zhu Wenrong's family acts as the principal management and executive force of the Hangdian Group, the local farmers became embedded partners, so their financial security is tied to the studio's success, transforming them from displaced landowners into the primary beneficiaries of Chinawood. Now, one would think, okay, so what did Wu get out of this venture, right? I mean, it can't just be all, rainbows and unicorns, right? Well, he extracted extraordinary personal wealth, immense political and social power, and a lasting family legacy out of this venture. Because while he famously downplayed his fortune to align with China's common prosperity ethos, once inviting the compilers of the Huron Rich list to look at his books to prove his money belonged to the town, Zhu personally gained immense returns across several key areas. And we'll now look at those areas. One of them was vast family wealth and control. So he achieved his billionaire status. Zhu became one of China's very first billionaires. The overall Hangdian Group parent conglomerate generates over 13 billion US dollars, which is 94 billion Chinese yen, in annual revenue. And then, it became a family dynasty. So even though it is collectively owned, Zhu maintained absolute managerial control. When he retired as president in 2003, he successfully handed day-to-day operations and leadership of the multi-million-dollar empire over to his son, Yong'an, right? So that you need to keep in mind. And then number 2, diversified business monopolies. The film studio is only the public-facing crown jewel of Zhu's empire. By turning Hangdian into a cultural center, Zhu used the studio's success to feed his other highly lucrative private and publicly traded businesses. For example, you have the behind the scenes cash machine, where while the sets are rent free, as we just talked about it, Zhu's companies hold a complete monopoly on the logistics. So if a crew shoots there, for example, they're forced to spend millions renting heavy equipment, lighting rigs, props, and costumes exclusively from Zhu's subsidiaries, right? And then he expanded the group into controlling 6 massive publicly listed corporations, making it an industrial empire, and over 200 factories in high profit sectors like pharmaceuticals, electronics, chemicals, and magnetic materials. And number 3, ultimate political capital and the untouchable status. In China, a billionaire's greatest asset is often their relationship with the state. So by turning a poverty-stricken farming town into an economic powerhouse, Zhu earned maximum political projection and protection. So the ultimate aligned topology, because it was that, how do we put it? We will say that it was the ultimate aligned topology because his business model didn't displace poor people, but instead made them wealthy. The Chinese Communist Party lauded him as a model citizen who achieved the true goals of the socialist system. That gave him national standing. So he was elected as a prominent representative to the National People's Congress, giving him direct, rare legislative access to top state officials in Beijing. 4, monumental legacy projects. With his immense fortune and political backing, Zhu began building historic legacy projects that few individuals on earth could even dream of executing. His most famous pet project was constructing a $5 billion full-scale 1-to-1 replica of Beijing's old summer palace. Inside Hangdian, the original historic palace was destroyed by Anglo-French forces in 1860. And I think it's understandable why people would actually encourage him to go forward with this project, because after all, it's once again a move to honor one's history, isn't it? And Zhu's massive replica serves as his ultimate monument to Chinese cultural pride, and his personal vision. So now you will ask, did this actually originally start as a passion project, as in, because he was, thinking about his village economic prospects, and he was always thinking about how to raise the economy or the revenue of his, how to remove his village from poverty and himself too being an ex-farmer. Although, mind you, he was already a businessman who had enough money to create that whole thing, but again, not without the help and loyalty of his fellow villagers and farmers. So, was this actually a passion project? No, actually. It did not start as a passion project for filmmaking at all, because in fact, before 1996, the founder, Zhu Wenrong, had absolutely zero background interest or connection to the movie industry. Building the movie studio was a purely pragmatic, calculated business move to solve a massive financial crisis threatening his town. So, the pre-movie era, a magnets and silk powerhouse. As I said, long before Chinawood, Zhu Wenrong had already spent 2 decades building an industrial empire. As I said, he was already a rich businessman. In 1975, trying to lift his village out of extreme destitution, he took a tiny loan and started a fledgling silk factory. Using a strategy he called the hen lays eggs and hatches chicks, he used silk profits to build factories for knitting, dye, and clothing. So in the 1980s and 90s, he pivoted heavily into high-tech manufacturing, specifically magnet materials and electronics. He was so successful that his town, Dongyang, became known as the magnetic capital of the world. So he had managed to get his town or his village out of that destitution. By 1995, Zhu was already incredibly wealthy, but his industrial factories were facing a looming economic threat: severe environmental regulations and market shifting. That meant that his town needed to rapidly diversify into the service of tourism, the tourism sector or the service sector. Now, the accident that changed history. In 1996, a prominent director named Ji Jin, as we already talked about in the beginning, was desperately trying to find a place to build this massive 19th century colonial street sets for historical film, the Opium War. And he had been rejected by several major cities because blocking off real modern streets for a film shoot was economically impossible, right? So an acquaintance introduced the director to Zhu Wenrong, and Zhu didn't care about the art of cinema. All he saw was a golden opportunity to kickstart a local tourism industry to sustain his town. So he famously told the director, "You provide the blueprints, I will provide the land and laborers, and I will build it for you in 4 months." So this was pure business logic over artistic passion, okay? He used his massive army of industrial factory workers and local farmers to build a Guangzhou street, as I said before, and they actually built it ahead of schedule. So the movie was a massive hit, and tourists flooded the town just to see the sets. And when Zhu realized the movie industry was a flawless Trojan horse for his true goal, which was real estate, hospitality, and infrastructure development, he didn't, he just decided to then, go all in and invest in it properly. So he didn't build the studio because he loved movies. He built it because film crews bring thousands of people who need to eat, sleep, shop, and spend money in his town. So when other directors saw how fast he could build things, they asked for ancient palaces. He kept building them purely because the math worked out for him. And the movie studio was born out of cold, hard industrial opportunism, one could argue, because he took a gamble on a single film director to pivot his town away from heavy factory pollution and into the booming tourism economy. So we could argue that, okay, it wasn't a passion project, but it was basically about raising the economy of his village. Yes, because from the very first day he stepped into business until the day he retired, his just for this one thing, okay, his one driving force was economic survival and prosperity for his hometown. Now, in modern business history, he is viewed not as an entertainment mogul, but as a legendary social entrepreneur and a village savior. He grew up in such extreme poverty that his family had to beg for food, and he vowed that if he ever made money, he would drag his entire community out of destitution with him. So you can see that he did not forget that sentiment, even when he went on to become rich, because each time he made money, he literally was adding to his village's economy, building factories for them or setting up industries for them, every single time. That was his single-minded focus, okay? And it can be proved by how he systematically handled every stage of his career. Now, one of the most interesting things that you could argue he did, or one of the best things, was he blocked brain drain. In the 1980s, as China's economy began to open up, millions of rural young people abandoned their villages to move to coastal megacities like Shanghai and Shenzhen for factory work, right? So Zhu hated seeing his hometown hollowed out. By constantly building new silk, magnet, and electronics factories, he ensured that local youth could get high-paying jobs without ever having to leave their families, right? And as we know, this is something that I also talked about years ago in my podcasts, when I always said that, If people who make something out of their lives once they leave their villages and small towns and come into bigger metropolitan cities, is that if they could now take whatever it is that they have learned and then, go back to their villages to help with a communal development, to help raise their villages to that status where they can all find their desirable opportunities within those villages, to develop their own areas. That was the ideal thing. And this was something that actually we used to talk about even as students in college, But, well, very few people actually remembered these ideas and went back. A good majority of them, at the end of the day, actually just never turned back. But in his case, in Zhu's case, he exploited the government's slogan for funding. What he did was, because he was a master at playing politics, to get economic favors for his town. So whenever the central government in Beijing announced a new economic goal, whether it was industrial modernization in the 80s or cultural development in the 90s or common prosperity in the 2000s, Zhu would immediately pivot Hangdian's business model to match it. This guaranteed that his village received massive state bank loans, tax breaks, and infrastructure approvals that regular villages could never get. And the ultimate proof, if you ever had any suspicion, was he chose a ghost town over the capital. When the Hangdian film studio became a multi-billion-dollar success, major corporate advisors begged Zhu to move the company's official headquarters to Beijing or Shanghai. Moving would have given the company better access to international investors and massive stock market valuations, right? But he flatly refused. He insisted that the headquarters must stay in Hangdian so that every single tax dollar the company paid went directly into the local municipal budget to build local roads, schools, and hospitals. Yeah, that was how serious he was about it, and how he never forgot that goal that drove him into making money in the first place. And then you would ask now, okay, so what does that village look like now today? Well, because of his obsession with the local economy, the village of Hangdian no longer exists in any traditional sense. Today, it is a high-tech urban oasis. The average disposable income of a Hangdian resident is significantly higher than the national average of rural town dwellers. The town boasts its own commercial airport, yes, a high-speed rail station, luxury skyscrapers, and high-end cinemas. So Wenrong didn't care about Hollywood glamour or red carpets or movie stars. To him, film crews and celebrities were simply a highly profitable, sustainable crop that replaced farming to keep his people wealthy. So he was not a conventional businessman, in the conventional sense of the word, right? He was not a selfish businessman, you would say. This is, I guess, what the best way to define him, because he is regarded as such a unique and iconic figure in modern economic history. Because unlike a conventional hyper-capitalist businessman whose primary metrics are personal net worth, corporate stock prices, and shareholder payouts, Zhu's entire life was anchored by an unwavering sincerity towards communal wealth and collective security. So economists and historians often point to three specific traits that set his sincere model apart from conventional corporate greed. 1. He aligned with the red capitalist ideal. 2. He redefined success through social metrics. And 3. The unbreakable ecosystem. Right? So, to summarize it all, he successfully merged business pragmatism with a genuine socialist conscience, thereby aligning himself with the red capitalist ideal. In a time when many private business owners in China were hoarding wealth or moving their money offshore, Zhu fiercely protected his hometown. He viewed money not as a personal property, but as a civic tool to eliminate poverty. Remember, that was always his goal. By giving his workers joint ownership shares, he ensured that as the Hangdian group grew, no farmer was left behind. And how did he redefine success through social metrics? A conventional CEO measures success by profit margins, but Zhu measured his success by looking out his office window. Did the local children have a brand new school? Could an elderly farmer get free world-class medical treatment at the town hospital? Did the town have paved roads and clean running water? By treating infrastructure and social welfare as primary business objectives rather than afterthoughts or charity, he built an unbreakable bond of trust, with his community. And that resulted obviously in an unbreakable ecosystem, because this sincerity wasn't just morally noble, it was a genius business strategy. Because the local farmers and workers knew Zhu was genuinely fighting for their collective wealth, they gave him absolute loyalty. So when he needed to build the massive movie sets in record-breaking time frames, the entire town worked day and night with immense pride, because they knew that they were building their own future, not just a billionaire's empire. So Zhu went wrong proved that a business could achieve astronomical Hollywood-scale commercial success while remaining fiercely rooted in human empathy and communal solidarity. And that is why I felt that this was worth talking about, because it proves our, argument that this is not just, a romantic notion. It's not just an idealistic approach to business, because as I said, Islam has also, dictated communal wealth, or communal share in profits, or as in, you're not supposed to grow alone, but if you all grow together, you actually end up growing more, because if everybody's prosperous and nobody gets left behind, then, you reach higher levels, right, as a community and as an individual. And as we know, this was a business model that was practiced by the Prophet, peace be upon him. It was practiced in his time by the businessmen who followed his advice, And so when we regressed to Western capitalism, where it was each for his own, that is where the whole jungle, survival of the fittest theme began, which, as you can see, only leads to further regression as a society, as a civilization, as a country. So this was something that I thought was worth noting, and it was food for thought, really. And especially, if you look at the way he built those cities and those medieval cities, the Republican era cities, it's amazing. It really does give you that, that whole hyper-realistic experience where you get confused and you're like, hang on, is this the studio? Is this the set? Or is this the actual original city? So I thought it was worth talking about. Well, this is me signing out. Khuda Hafiz.